I sent my father 57 cents. That's it. 57 cents. After 9 years. After $500,000. After the worst 3 months of my life. My son was in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, and not one person in my family came to see him. Not once. But when my father needed money for a real estate deal, he texted me that same week. So I sent him exactly 57 cents, and I told him why. What happened in the hour after that changed my family forever. And I've never regretted it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Diane Whitfield, and 3 months before I sent that message, my son Caleb was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He was 9 years old. I remember the exact words the doctor used, because I have replayed them in my head 1,000 times since. Early detection. Good odds. A treatable form of the disease. Words meant to comfort a mother standing in a hallway with her legs barely holding her up. And they helped, for about a day. Then the treatment started, and I learned that a good prognosis does not stop a child from vomiting every night, or from finding clumps of his own hair on the pillow in the morning, or from asking his mother a question she has no honest answer for. The hospital was called Riverbend Children's, and Tuesdays and Thursdays became the 2 days that defined my entire life. I would arrive by 8 in the morning and I would not leave until well past 6 in the evening, and in between those hours I watched an entire world of families move through that ward. Grandmothers arrived with foil-covered dishes still warm from the oven. Uncles took turns in the waiting room so that exhausted parents could finally close their eyes for an hour. Older brothers and sisters taped construction paper cards to the walls of hospital rooms, cards covered in crayon suns and stick figure families, and the words "get well soon" written in a child's careful handwriting. Caleb had me. A laptop balanced on my knees so I could keep my design business alive between appointments. And a phone that stayed silent in exactly the way I had stopped expecting it not to. I had told my family the day we received the diagnosis. I sent a group message, plain and direct, because I did not think there was any version of the truth that needed softening. Caleb has leukemia. Treatment starts next week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Riverbend Children's Hospital. He is scared. We could use your support. My mother, Linda, replied with 3 words. Sending you prayers. My sister, Renee, wrote that she would let me know if she could make it. My brother, Todd, sent a single sad face. My father, Walter, wrote 4 words that I would think about for the rest of that year. He's a fighter, Diane. And then, for 11 straight weeks, nothing at all. By the 2nd week, I told myself they were still processing the shock of it. By the 4th week, I told myself they had busy lives and complicated schedules, and that grown adults sometimes needed time to work up the courage to sit in a room with a sick child. By the 7th week, I stopped making excuses for anyone, and I simply stopped expecting the door of that hospital room to open unless it was a nurse walking through it. Caleb noticed long before I let myself admit it out loud. Children always notice. One afternoon, his bald head resting against my shoulder, his skin pale in a way that still visits me in dreams, he asked me why his grandfather never came to see him, when his grandfather had never once missed a single one of his baseball games. I did not have a real answer for him that day, and I do not think I have one now. I told him his grandfather was busy with work. I told him these things happen sometimes, that adults get overwhelmed, that it did not mean anyone loved him any less. I said these things because a 9-year-old boy hooked up to an intravenous line does not need to hear that the people who are supposed to love him unconditionally have simply chosen, again and again, not to show up. He asked about his Aunt Renee too, because she had promised him, actually promised him, that she would visit before his treatment even began. I held him a little tighter that day and said nothing, because there was nothing true I could say that would not have hurt him more. The nurses on that floor became something I had never expected a hospital staff to become to me. They knew our situation, not because I complained about it, but because they were the ones who watched an empty chair sit beside my son's bed week after week while other rooms filled with relatives. They started bringing Caleb extra juice boxes. They lingered a little longer during their rounds to ask him about his favorite cartoons. One nurse in particular, a woman named Grace who had been doing this work for over 20 years, began stopping by even on days she was not officially assigned to our floor. She became, in every way that mattered, more of a family to my son than the family whose last name he carried. We were deep into week 11, On a Thursday afternoon, when Caleb finally drifted off after a brutal morning of nausea that had left him too exhausted to keep his eyes open, I sat beside him, watching his thin chest rise and fall beneath a hospital blanket, when my phone lit up on the tray table beside me. My father's name appeared on the screen. The message was long, and it was detailed, and it was written with an excitement I had not heard from him in years. He had found what he called an incredible opportunity, a ground floor investment in a commercial real estate development downtown. He needed to move fast, he wrote. He needed $145,000 wired to him by Friday. He promised to pay me back triple within 2 years. He called it the big one. I read that message once, and then I read it again, slowly enough that the screen dimmed and went dark and I had to tap it awake just to be certain I had understood it correctly the first time. There was no mention of Caleb. No question about how his treatment was going. No apology, not even a passing one, for 11 weeks of silence while his own grandson fought for his life 2 floors above a chemotherapy suite. Just a number and a deadline, and an expectation that I would meet both without hesitation, exactly as I always had. Something in my chest went very still in that moment. It was not anger. I had burned through anger somewhere around week 8 or 9, in the quiet hours between infusions. What replaced it was something colder, and in a strange way, something clearer than anything I had felt in years. I opened my banking app right there in that hospital chair. I did not deliberate for long. I sent my father exactly 57 cents, and in the memo line of that transfer, I typed 4 words. For your empty promises. Then I set my phone face down on the tray table, and I turned my attention back to my sleeping son, and for exactly 10 minutes, the world was quiet. Then the phone began to vibrate against the plastic tray, over and over, and I watched it without picking it up. My father's name appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I let every call go to voicemail. Then it was my mother calling. I declined that one too. Within minutes, my screen filled with a stream of messages arriving faster than I could read them, each one a little more incredulous than the last. "What is this?" my father wrote. "Is this some kind of joke? Your father is trying to help this family and this is how you respond," my mother wrote next. "This is childish, Diane," my sister added. "We are trying to include you in something big." I did not respond to a single one of them. I kept my hand resting on Caleb's arm, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse beneath my fingertips, and in that moment his pulse was the only thing in the world I cared to pay attention to. The tone of the messages began to shift within the hour, the way a room shifts when the people in it realize they are no longer being taken seriously. "You owe this family," my father wrote. "We are calling in that debt," my mother added. My brother sent one that made me almost laugh out loud in an empty hospital room. "Dad's lawyer says you are legally obligated to help." An hour after that first call, my sister Renee phoned me from a number I did not recognize, and against my better judgment, I picked it up. "You need to talk to Dad," she said. "This opportunity closes on Friday. We do not have time for whatever this is." I told her, quietly, that I was sitting in a hospital room, that my 9-year-old son was hooked up to a chemotherapy line at that exact moment, and that she was calling me about a real estate deal. "We care about Caleb," she said. "Do you?" I asked her if she knew what day it was. She said Thursday. I asked her if she knew what happened on Thursdays. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Caleb has treatment every Tuesday and every Thursday," I told her. "He has for 11 weeks. Can you tell me which hospital we are in?" More silence. "You don't know," I said, "because you have never once asked." I told her to put my father on speaker, and to gather everyone else into the same room, because I only intended to say what came next a single time. I heard shuffling in the background, muffled voices, someone whispering that I sounded angry. Then my father's voice came through, smooth and practiced in the way it always was when he wanted something. "Diane," he said, "let's be reasonable about this. For 9 years," I told him, cutting through whatever he was about to say next, "I have been paying your mortgage." The line went completely silent. I did not raise my voice. I simply began to lay out the numbers, one after another, the way I had spent that entire morning laying them out for myself on a spreadsheet I had never intended to build. I reminded him of the $102,000 I had taken out in a personal loan to save his failing business, a loan he had promised to repay within 6 months and never once mentioned again in the 9 years since. I reminded him of the mortgage payments, $4,900 a month, that I had been sending for 7 straight years after he told me it would only be temporary. I listed the property taxes I had covered, both of my parents' car payments, my mother's $46,000 in credit card debt that I had quietly paid down without ever telling either of them I knew the balance, the vacation cabin I had helped finance but had never once been invited to visit. "That's not possible," my mother whispered, and I could hear, for the first time in years, something like fear in her voice. "You always told everyone I was barely scraping by as a graphic designer," I said. "What you never mentioned is that I built a full design agency with 14 employees and major corporate clients, working 80-hour weeks to keep it standing while quietly keeping the two of you standing as well. My son and I live in a rental home because there has never been enough left over for a down payment. His college fund is nearly empty, not because I failed to provide for him, but because I have spent 9 years providing for people who never once thought to ask where any of that money actually came from." "Why didn't you tell us?" my brother asked, his voice suddenly small in a way I had never heard from him before. "Because you had already decided who I was," I told him. "The divorced one. The one with no real career. The family's charity case, when in reality I was the one holding this entire family together with money none of you ever bothered to thank me for." I told them about the night, only a month earlier, when Caleb's fever spiked to 104 degrees at 2 in the morning, and I called every single person on that phone at that moment, one after another, and not one of them answered. I told them who sat with me instead, at 2 in the morning, in an emergency room, waiting to find out if my son was going to be all right. It was Grace, his nurse, who came in on her own day off because she already knew, without needing to be told, that we would be sitting there alone. "That woman has known my son for 3 months," I said, my voice breaking for the first time in the entire call, "and she has shown him more genuine love than anyone in this family has shown him in his entire life." I told them what I had already done that morning before my father's message had even arrived. I had gone into my banking portal and canceled every single automatic transfer connected to their accounts. The mortgage payment due the following week would not be arriving. The car payments were finished. The loan repayments, non-existent as they had functionally been anyway, were formally closed. "You can't do that," my father said, panic finally breaking through that practice calm. "The bank will foreclose. Then I suppose you will need that $145,000 opportunity to work out after all," I told him. "Celestine," my mother said, using a name that was not mine but that felt, in that moment, strangely appropriate for the woman she seemed to think she was speaking to. "Please, we will lose everything." I told them I had 9 years of documentation. Every transfer. Every wire. Every emergency I had quietly absorbed so that the rest of them never had to feel the weight of it. I told them I also had 11 weeks of hospital visitor logs from Riverbend Children's, official records showing exactly who had walked through those doors to see my son, and exactly who had not. "What are you saying?" my father asked, his voice hardening into something I recognized from childhood arguments I thought I had long since outgrown. "I'm saying you have 4 months," I told him. "Refinance the house. Sell whatever needs selling. Find actual jobs. I do not care how you manage it, but I am done being this family's bank." "What about family loyalty?" my brother asked bitterly. "That is an excellent question," I told him. "When Caleb finishes his treatment today, why don't you come ask him yourself what family loyalty means?" Room 412, 4th floor, Riverbend Children's Hospital. Visiting hours run until 8 tonight. He would love, more than anything, to finally meet his family. I ended the call before my father could respond, and I sat there in that hospital chair with my hands shaking in a way they had not shaken since the day of Caleb's diagnosis. When he stirred awake a short while later and asked if I was all right, I told him yes, and I meant it more than I had in months. 2 hours passed before a nurse leaned into the doorway and told me, gently, that I had a visitor waiting. My heart sank, certain it was my father come to argue his case in person. "It's your brother," she said instead. "He's asking if it would be all right to come in, and I can send him away if you'd like." I hesitated, and then I looked at Caleb, whose eyes had lit up at the mention of an uncle he barely knew, and I told her it was fine, just him. Todd walked into that room 5 minutes later carrying a gift bag, and the moment his eyes landed on the 4th pole and the monitors and his nephew's small frame beneath the hospital blanket, his face fell apart. "Hey little man," he said, his voice rough in a way I had never heard from him. "I'm sorry I haven't been here. That was wrong of me, really wrong. He sat down beside the bed and pulled out a handheld video game, and for the next hour I watched my brother ask my son real questions about his treatment, about how the medicine made him feel, about which games he liked best, and he actually listened to every answer. When Caleb finally drifted off to sleep again, Todd looked at me with tears in his eyes and told me he had not known. He had known I was helping our parents financially, but he had never understood the scale of it, and he had never realized they had been ignoring me through all of this. I asked him if our parents had sent him. He told me no, that he had come because he wanted to, because he was ashamed of himself, and because Caleb was his nephew and he should have been there from the very beginning. I told him that Caleb's treatments were every Tuesday and Thursday, 2 o'clock, usually running until around 6 in the evening. He told me he would be there, and for the next 4 months, until the final day of Caleb's treatment, he kept that promise every single time. The rest of my family responded very differently. My mother visited exactly once, 3 weeks later, arriving with expensive gifts and tears, and spent most of the visit explaining how overwhelmed she had been and how I should have made the severity of the situation clearer to her. I asked her to leave before the visit reached 20 minutes. My father never came at all. He mailed a single card with a generic message inside, unsigned. My sister texted daily for about a week, then weekly, and then not at all. The financial collapse I had predicted arrived almost exactly on schedule. Within 4 months, my parents had sold their house, their vacation cabin, and both of their vehicles. My father's business finally folded for good. They moved into a small apartment, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, they both found actual jobs. My mother called me in tears more than once during those months, and I listened politely each time and offered nothing beyond that. My father sent me a single email roughly 3 months later, 4 words long. "You destroyed this family." I replied with 5 words of my own. No, I stopped enabling it. Caleb finished his treatment the following February, and the doctors confirmed what I had prayed to hear for months, that he was in remission. We celebrated with a small gathering at our rental house, nothing extravagant, just the people who had actually shown up for him. My brother came with his wife and children. Grace, his nurse, came as well, having become a genuine friend to both of us by then. A few of Caleb's school friends joined too. No one else from my extended family appeared, and Caleb, running around that small backyard with color finally returned to his cheeks and soft new hair growing in across his scalp, did not seem to notice their absence at all. He was simply too busy being a 9-year-old boy again. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he told me it had been the best day of his entire life. Then, quieter, he asked me if I had noticed that Uncle Todd had really come every single time he said he would. I told him yes, I had noticed. "That's what family is supposed to do, right?" he asked me. "Show up." I kissed his forehead and told him yes, exactly that. That is precisely what family is supposed to do. 6 months later, my design agency landed the largest client in its history, and without the constant financial drain toward my parents, I was finally able to reinvest fully in my own business, hire better talent, and take on projects I had never before had the capital to pursue. I bought us a real home, 3 bedrooms, a backyard for Caleb to grow up in, and an office where I no longer had to balance a laptop on my knees between hospital visits. My brother helped us move in on a warm Saturday morning. The rest of my family sent nothing. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, only the same silence they had offered throughout Caleb's entire illness. But for the first time in 9 years, every single dollar I earned belonged to us alone. It went toward our future, toward rebuilding Caleb's college fund from nothing, toward building the kind of stable, secure life I should have been able to give my son from the very beginning, long before any of this ever happened. I have never once regretted sending my father 57 cents that Thursday afternoon in a hospital room. It remains, to this day, the single best investment I have ever made.